afternoon. Thanks to everyone for joining and welcome to today's webinar, The Immigration Playbook, Visa Prep for the World's Biggest Sporting Stages, presented by BAL. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. If you have a question during the presentation, you may submit it at any time via the Q&A button located in the menu bar on the right side of your screen. Simply navigate to the Q&A section, click on the Ask a Question button, and type your question into the window and hit Submit. An email containing a link to the slides and on-demand recording of this session will go out within 24 hours of the webinar start time. And finally, at the end of the webinar, we would appreciate you letting us know how we did via the survey section on the right side of your screen. We value your feedback as it shapes how we provide you with updates that are most relevant to you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. Gabriel Castro is the head of BAL's sports and entertainment team and leads our Los Angeles office. He has represented major professional sports franchises in the NBA, WNBA, NHL, MLB, and MLS. Gabriel has helped secure visas for top international talent and has experience working with clients in esports, music, film, and television. Tiffany Derentz serves as senior counsel, leads BAL's Washington, D.C. office, and is a member of both BAL's government strategies and sports and entertainment teams. She has extensive immigration and consular services experience, working at the Department of State for nearly a decade. As a consular officer posted overseas, Tiffany assisted in the planning of the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics. Kristi is an associate in BAL's Los Angeles office, where she specializes in U.S. business immigration, particularly the EB-5 Immigrant Investor Program and sports and entertainment immigration. She excels in investment and employment-based immigration, assisting diverse clients from startups to multinational corporations across industries like sports and entertainment, technology, and finance. And with that, I'll turn things over to Gabriel.
Lexi, thanks so much. We are very excited to be here with you all today. First, before we begin, I just want to thank you for taking the time to hear us talk a little bit about what we find to be a pretty interesting subject. Those of you that are on the line that may be familiar with BAL's webinars, I apologize that we are not getting into the intricate details of H-1B regulations today. Instead, we'll be talking about sports events. But entertainment is in my job title, so I do take it personally when I say I want to be entertaining and make this a little fun for everyone. But with that, let's talk a little bit about what we're talking about today, and that is mega sporting events coming to the United States. This is an exceptionally exciting time and a very unique time in U.S. sports history. It's been several decades now since we've hosted an event like the Olympics or the World Cup, and all of a sudden it seems like that's all we can do over the next several years. We are hosting the World Cup, of course, next year. We just finished the Club World Cup in 2025. My town of Los Angeles is hosting the Olympics in 3 years. We're looking at the Rugby World Cup, the Women's World Cup, the Women's FIFA Women's World Cup, the Women's Rugby World Cup. The Winter Olympics are all happening within the next decade. This is a very exciting time for sports, but also I think that means that there's some open questions in terms of what that means for immigration. What that means for these tournament organizers and how they're going to bring in workers, how the teams and the performers and the athletes are all going to come in, the sponsors, the vendors, there's so many people coming for these tournaments. And I think those are some of the questions we're getting into today. And I know that we have multiple types of audiences listening, and some of you are professionals in the U.S. immigration sphere, I think, that want to hear more about how this is done and are kind of excited to listen in on what's going on these tournaments. I think some people are working with some of the tournament organizers or stakeholders themselves, and some of them are individuals with representing organizations from outside of the country. This may be the first time they've heard a talk on U.S. immigration, and we'll keep that in mind when we are talking about some the issues that we are talking about today. But before we get into that, I do want to just ask around here, Kristi, Tiffany, what are you guys most excited about in this next decade when it comes to these tournaments coming?
I mean, I think I'm just excited to see these events come back to the U.S. and have an opportunity to show off what the U.S. has to offer. It's super exciting to see all the different host cities around the U.S. be able to kind of showcase their cities as well.
Yeah, I'm absolutely excited about that. And also being from Los Angeles. I am particularly excited to see the events, Olympics being part of the LA area, just close to home. That's really exciting.
I'm with you there as well. Big, proud Angelino myself. I'm so excited for the Summer Olympics, but I will say soccer is my favorite sport. I've been to 2 World Cups and I'm so excited to see it here in the United States. I'm also excited, it's not official yet, the Women's World Cup, the bid is out and the US is the only bidder combined with Mexico. So we do expect that in the next decade. I myself have some clients that usually play in the Women's World Cup, so I'm really excited to see that as well. But with that, let's talk a little bit about the size of these tournaments. I don't know if people realize how grand these things can really be. And I think if you really want to understand what's coming, you can look at what's just occurred, and that's the Club World Cup. I mean, this included players from 66 countries from around the world. We saw average fans of 34,000 fans per match. There was nearly 70,000 members of the media here for the event, corporate partners that also were here, and the media representatives were from even more countries than the players, of course, because every country in the world wants to cover events like this. So just trying to get an idea of the large scale of what goes into these events. It's so many people, so many countries involved, and of course bringing them all to the United States is no easy feat. And there's many different stakeholders involved in making sure that happens. But to get a little bit idea of what that means and what it even means to plan one of these events, I do want to go into a little bit about like what's going on in the background. After they announce these events, I don't think it's just, day 2, okay, we're ready to go. Tiffany, part of your job with our government strategies team is that you're actually part of many talks on events like this and making it happen in the US. So can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like, what you're seeing in your discussions?
Yeah, so there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes between host country governments and event organizers. And for those of you that caught this in my intro, you would have heard that I previously worked at our US Embassy in Moscow, and I was leading efforts planning the US government's preparations for the Sochi Winter Olympics. So during that time, I was working really closely with the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee, the Russian and other foreign governments, as well as a range of other stakeholders. So I've actually kind of been on both sides of this pretty much for my entire career, funny enough. And so I won't get into too many details because there's so much we could talk about that, and that's not why we're here today. But basically, when a country is seeking to host an event like this, we're talking these major events, they're going to go through this bidding process. And during that bid process, the organizers are looking at a number of factors, including immigration, because immigration is a very big component here. And then once a country is selected to be the host for an event, the event organizer is starting to work closely with that government pretty much immediately. Now, these efforts are going to usually ramp up quite a bit as we get closer to the event itself. For example, you might have seen the creation of the White House Task Force for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, as well as more recently, the Task Force for the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games in Los Angeles. These are just 2 examples of how the US government is currently working with these organizers to prepare for these 2 historic events. One of which is coming up next summer, so we don't have as much time, but for LA 28, we have a little bit more time there. And a lot of this is not only educating the government on the types of travelers and the types of people that are coming here, but also the challenges that those travelers are facing, and what the process is going to look like in advance of people coming to the United States for these big events.
That's very interesting. I never considered how even at the onset, when they're making the bidding process, the immigration is already on the mind of both the host organizer and also the host countries. One question in recent history, has there been any examples such as like a rule change or anything where the government has made it easier for individuals to attend or work at these events in the United States?
Well, so each country does it a little bit differently. A lot of times countries will create a special visa process or a visa category for events like this. The US often handles things a little bit differently, but that said, there are some things that they have done to work with these organizers and kind of help certain groups of travelers. I feel like you're stealing my thunder a little bit here because one of them we're going to talk about a little bit more later, but it relates to the referees. There was a change in the Foreign Affairs Manual earlier this year that related to certain officials being able to come to the United States on a B visa. And that was really to help the travelers get here because there was a lot of lack of clarity for what visa that they should apply for.
Yeah. And that actually does lead in a little bit into our next conversation. There are many workers coming here, and I think sort of getting to the idea of who needs a visa, why immigration even matters in this conversation. I think it will be no surprise to anyone on this call that the U.S. immigration system can be quite complex. It can be quite lengthy, and determining who's working in the United States and who needs a work visa in the United States is, I think, a question or the first question that you should be asking. And I think that's what we're going to go through with some of these groups first, because yes, many of them are going to be eligible for a business visitor visa to the United States and be able to use that. But if they're not, and they are doing work that requires more, I think a lot more has to be done in the process, and people need to be aware of that as early as they can. So I think we can take a few of these as examples, and we're just going to go down the line and discuss them. But let's discuss a few of these that do not require work visas in the United States, or they do not. They might fall under an exception. So let's talk about the teams. Tiffany, can you talk about including the athletes, coaches, other support staff for these tournaments? What's going on for their immigration cases?
Yeah, so there's a few key groups of people who can apply for and travel on what we would call a B1, B2 tourist visa or visa waiver program. And that does include teams oftentimes in these contexts. Now, there's a lot of different things that we have to take into consideration, but for the most part, if a team is traveling and they will only compete for prize money, then they can in fact come on to the US with a B visa instead of having a work visa. And the same would apply to the support staff for those teams.
Would it matter what country they're coming for, whether they actually need a visa in their passport or not?
It will. There's only certain countries that qualify for the visa waiver program, and even those nationals from the eligible countries, they still might require a visa if they've been to a country that they are not permitted to have traveled under that program, such as the Iranian World Cup team, for example. And so there are different considerations, but generally speaking, teams, for example, for the upcoming 2026 World Cup should be able to travel on a B1, B2 visa or under the visa waiver program.
Great. Kristi, how about sponsors, providers of or other partners that are working with the host organizers? What will they need? Work visas to the U.S., or how's their immigration process going to look?
They will need work visas. Any individuals who are going to the U.S. to perform hands-on activity will require some sort of work visa. This also depends on the source of their pay. And we're going to go into the types of visas at more depth in a minute, but visas can be the O1s or L1 visas, specialty occupation visas, E3, H1B ones, TN visas, and if they're working in the media, the I visa. The process will depend very greatly on the visa type. We could apply with USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Oftentimes it's a slightly longer process, or they may apply directly at the U.S. consulate, U.S. embassy abroad, or the port of entry, based on various factors. Again, visa type, the applicant nationality.
So you mentioned sponsors might need work visas. Does it matter what they're doing in the United States? Will all corporate partners, whether they're representing their company here for just say business meetings, will they require work visas as well?
No, if the individual is only going to business meetings or say site visits, they can rely on a B1, B2, or ESTA visa, or ESTA waiver, that is. But if they will be doing hands-on work and getting paid by a U.S. company or U.S. source, then they will need a work visa.
Okay, great. And you mentioned in your response initially the iMedia visa, and that's good. I think that leads us to our next group here. Media broadcasters, not just the people on live on the air, but the people holding cameras, the reporters from newspapers. What are they classified? Where do they fall under? And I know we'll get into the details of that procedure later.
Well, they classify under the I visa. So that includes representatives of foreign media. And like you said, that includes people on air, broadcasters, print journalists, but it also includes production workers as well. Just anybody to bring together the production, the broadcast, disseminating news and information. And that process is usually directly with the U.S. consulate.
Okay, thank you. Tiffany, I know you mentioned that I jumped the gun a little bit, but we do want to hear a little bit more about the referees, and I think you'd mentioned that they might fall under an exception and they might be able to come in on a visitor visa. Tell us a little bit more about that and what other types of employees that might fall under this referee exception.
Yeah, so the referees are another category that generally speaking can come on that B1, B2 business or tourist visa or under the visa waiver program. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, this happened earlier this year, and it was right in advance of the Club World Cup. And the State Department updated their guidance to clarify that the B visas were appropriate for certain referees, judges, and technical officials. And that guidance specifically references the World Cup and the Olympics. In practice, we're seeing this be applied pretty limited to officials that are in roles that are very closely tied to what's going on the field or on the pitch. But this is an improvement from the lack of guidance that existed previously, and which still exists for a couple of categories that I don't think that we'll fully touch on here, but that potentially can fall under this category as well for the B visa or the ESTA. And that would be your volunteers. And then the easiest one, of course, is fans. So I kind of jumped ahead there. But I think with any of these categories, there's sort of a presumption that certain visas might apply, but there's not a one size fits all for everybody. And so there are going to be different exceptions to the rule.
So that's great. Thank you for finishing us up right there. I think that brings us to our next point: is what types of visas will these individuals even be applying for? So Tiffany, can you lead us a little bit in that discussion?
Yeah, so let's dive into the different visa categories themselves, because the U.S. does not have a special event visa category. So like I said just a moment ago, this is not going to be one size fits all. And we're working within our existing immigration framework, which is not really set up or structured for these major events. So let's start with these most common ones in the sports context, which for those of you that are listening in that do not usually deal in the sports context, these might be a little less familiar. But let's kind of talk about, Kristi, for thinking back to some of those groups we just talked about, what are some key considerations and when somebody might be classified on the B visa versus, for example, the P1A or even the O1?
Yeah. There's a lot of considerations involved in we needed legal analysis on what are the risk factors, cost, timing, the applicant credentials, nationality, to determine what visa classification they best fit into. The first one I want to talk about and distinguish is the O1 visa, because it's the most versatile that we have here. It's for individuals with extraordinary ability in athletics, sciences, education, business, or these individuals are considered best of the best with a record of national or international acclaim. So the applicant must have a major internationally recognized award or meet certain number of criteria that will require some more in-depth analysis into. Like I said, the O1 is a versatile visa because it can apply to a lot of different roles within a sports event context, right? The athletes, coaches, but also personnel on the event side, like designers, managers, and also the performers. Like musical performers at the event, they're probably best of the best if they're coming over to the US for these sports. But it does have the longest visa process and require the most amount of points. And I mean, that's by nature of the classification. Like if you're going to prove that these people are the top of the field, USCIS is going to want to see that. It does require filing with USCIS first before the applicant can apply for the visa. So it's just the longest process overall. And it doesn't really fit the other visa classifications that we'll talk about today. Oh, it's a potential.
So Kristi, next year's World Cup is supposed to have a halftime show, which is not always normal. And we know that corporate sponsors also host a variety of events, often with live entertainment. What are some of the key considerations, or when might this P1B visa come into play?
Oh yeah, you want to bring BTS to perform at your event, which fantastic idea. But the P1B would be the most applicable one here. It applies to internationally recognized performers who are part of an entertainment group. So it's narrow in that way. It's only for foreign-based groups or individuals joining a US-based group. It doesn't apply to individual artists. So those will have to go O1 or another category that we don't have here as a P2 visa, but that does require the government recognized reciprocal exchange program. So that just suggests more reasons to bring BTS instead. And all of these entertainer applications will have to go through USCIS first.
Awesome. And Gabriel, I know you and the team have filed a lot of P1 visas and a lot of P1S visas, but some roles that are tied to these major international events don't always fit perfectly in these categories with what the government agencies are used to seeing. You know, you can have your professional team with all of the normal roles that they're used to seeing, but how does that come up in a major sporting event context where you're having teams from all around the world come to the US to compete?
I mean, Tiffany, that's a really great question, because as we've already mentioned multiple times here, is that there is no sporting event visa. There's no exception to the US immigration system that allows for large mega sporting events to bring in whatever workers they would like for these tournaments. And we have to be creative on the approaches that we take in assisting, whether that be the organizer, other stakeholders, you know, the people that are working on the field, or the teams themselves. As you mentioned, most of those teams and the players do qualify under B1, B2, or ESTA. But when we look at some other support personnel that might be part of the tournament, we look at the P1S. The P1S is an essential support personnel visa that is essential support personnel for someone on a P1A professional athlete visa, or it could be on P1B. But they are individuals by the terms of the regulations that are actually directly affecting the work that is being done on the field. So when you think of a traditional P1S, and you mentioned in Major League Sports and other sporting events, you think of the coaches, the trainers, people that are, you know, setting up the locker room or helping with the equipment, things of that nature. But truly, we've seen the P1S be interpreted much more broadly, both in the Major League Sports context, but also in tournament events like this, to include people that can affect the field in other ways, whether that might be security officials for the stadium, pitch management crew that are helping make sure that the field is up to bat. Of course, the limitation on the biggest limitation on the P1S is that you do have to have that P1A approval. They will not provide a P1S for a petitioner that doesn't have a P1 participating in the tournament. But also the limitations are how closely related to the actual sport is that role going to be, right? So you really have to think of how is it going to affect the on the field play. The people that are selling tickets or doing the marketing for the event, maybe not a best fit for the P1S, but I do think that there has been a broader interpretation and more willingness from USCIS to approve cases in this category.
So earlier when I was talking about the referees and the Foreign Affairs manual note that allows for B, that captures some of those officials, but some of them might be in this P1S category instead, right?
That is a great point. I only recently learned that for many of these tournaments, the referees on the fields aren't the whole refereeing team. That, of course, they are the best of the best, and that's why they are refereeing at this level. But to do so, it takes training and nutrition and fitness instructors. It takes the judges of the referees to coach them on the next game, to help them learn from what they were doing. I mean, there's whole teams of people that support that refereeing staff. That don't fall under the term referee, right? That they don't fall under the terms for that B1, B2 exception. And so they do need to fall into something like the P1S that says, hey, they can come in to do this support that will directly impact the on-the-field performance because that they're impacting what the referees are doing. And so I think that's a really great example of a way this P1S could be used.
And I would say a big part of our job too is to learning about these events so that we can help educate the government when filing these petitions, because at the end of the day, it's that petition that has to be filed and approved by the government in order to get that P1S visa.
Yep, that's
Awesome.
right. That's right.
Okay, well, did you have to say something, Kristi?
Yeah, because we talked about like the P1S, but let's also talk about like the P1A. I think we kind of I passed that of like the athlete visa. That is for internationally recognized professional athletes or teams that are coming to the US to compete. Now, a lot of these team members can come on a B1 or ESTA, but there are certain situations in which the P1A is much more appropriate, such as like as Gabriel mentioned, if you need support staff to come on P1S, you need a P1A approval first. But also on the B1 or ESTA, there are limitations on the source of income. And on the P1A, they can get a salary, there's no such limitation on income, and they can engage in paid promotional activity and long-term training. So for certain athletes, this may make more sense than going on a B1 or ESTA.
Well, thank you for throwing that in there, Kristi, and apologies for trying to skip on ahead too fast. But I think that this is a great overview of sort of this sports visa side. But let's go ahead and shift gears a bit to the work visas, because this is another group of visas that are at play whenever you have these big events in the United States, because of all of the different people, such as corporate sponsors and media, that are coming to help support and make sure that these events are the success that we want them to be. So Kristi, let's start with L visas. What are some key considerations, and how have event organizers and corporate sponsors leveraged L1 visas for their workforce?
Yeah, the L1 is a really great tool for multinational organizations to transfer some of their key employees to the US to do the operations and setting up for this event. As we attendees may know, like the event doesn't just happen. This is like years in the making. So then you need a visa type that allows for longer term employment. But the L is specific and a good option for operational staff if the organization has an entity abroad and the employee has been working in certain qualified roles for at least 12 months. The qualified role being that they have to be manager, executive, or specialized knowledge capacity. And in that case, that does apply to more people than you may think. Now, the L1 process, it takes planning, because like the regular process is pretty comprehensive package petition that is filed with USCIS. But if the organization has what's called a blanket approval, this greatly streamlines the visa process and making it easier to transfer a lot of employees to the US to set up the event. And once the organization does have a blanket L, they can transfer employees from any of their non-US operations, and then the employee can apply directly at the consulate, and it can greatly diminishes the processing time costs for the company as a whole.
So I think the L1 is a great tool for multinational companies, especially anyone who is coming here, if they're hosting the tournament, stakeholders, corporate partners, to bring in their current employees into roles in the US as long as they meet certain other requirements. I think this is very, very useful for these tournaments. Of course, the L1, as Kristi mentioned, does have time limitations on it, but it is quite medium to long term in terms of how long people can stay and work in the United States. So it is a very useful tool when it comes to these tournaments.
But obviously not everybody's going to qualify for an L1 because we have this year requirement. We have certain limitations with what roles, but certain foreign nationals might have another option available. So can you talk a little bit about these nationality-based options? I don't know that we need to kind of dive into every single one of them, but there's a few in particular that we flagged here that are nationality-based that also authorize that individual to work in the US for these events.
Yes, I think that's a great point, is that the L1 is useful, but only for current employees that have been with you for at least a year. For companies that are looking to hire from anyone from abroad or bring in employees that don't have the requirements for the L1, we do have to look at other options. One of the best options to apply for a visa in the US, because of course the H-1B, that's the most common work visa in the US, but it is capped every year and you have to submit into the lottery. And so when helping employers in this situation, we have to look at options that don't require a lottery and a long wait time to start that visa. And some nationality-based exceptions do apply. The three that we're going to talk about today is the E3 for Australian nationals, the H-1B1 for Chilean and Singaporean nationals, and the TN, which was set up by the NAFTA trade agreement between Mexico and Canada, and it allows nationals from those countries to enter the United States on certain visa types as well. So all three of these categories don't require that cap. You can apply for it at any time of the year, and once you get that approval in your passport, that visa stamp, you are able to enter the U.S. immediately. What we look at when we talk about the E3 and the H-1B1, that's for the Australian, the Chileans, and the Singaporeans. These are specialized knowledge worker visas, and that just requires that the role itself is one that typically requires a bachelor's degree, and that the individual applying for that visa and then entering into that role has that degree or its equivalent, either in work experience or a similar degree. For the TN, for Canadians and Mexicans, it's a little bit more limited than that. There's a list of roles such as engineer, attorney, doctor, that individuals can qualify under, and if they meet the requirements for those roles, they can qualify for the TN. However, most of those aren't going to be very broad. There is one that we see a lot in the sports context, and that's the management consultant category. This is probably going to be the most commonly used for sports cases. That is, for any Canadian or Mexican that can qualify into that role, they could qualify for this visa. I will note, however, that the management consultant category, despite it getting some decent treatment in the sports category, is still one of the most highly scrutinized TN categories there are. And so we do see when we're assisting workers with this application that they do get additional questioning, especially when they're applying at the port of entry, which Canadians are able to, or at the consulate where the Mexican nationals are able to apply.
Awesome. Well, I was going to ask you about management consultants, but I didn't have to because you already raised it. But there's one more category left on this page, which is actually a really significant one. If you think back to the beginning of the presentation, we shared some numbers. And on that slide, we mentioned that there were almost 70,000 media here for the Club World Cup this past summer. We expect even more for the World Cup next summer. So this media and representatives play a very significant role. They are a major component of travelers for these major events. What are some of the key considerations for the I-Visa, Kristi?
I really like the I-Visa. I think it's an underutilized visa type. It's for members of foreign media, which means the representative does have to work for a non-US company, but print journalism, broadcast media, film, and now like online media as well. And they're traveling to the US to report news. So the content needs to be informational, educational value, and not just for entertainment or commercial value, which is not a problem in like the sports broadcasting context. But the individuals can include journalists, broadcasters, and production workers as well. Somebody involved in the actual media and production side. So all the ones that we have discussed here on this slide involves a fairly fast process because they can go directly to the US consulate, US embassy, or the port of entry for applying. So it is a faster way than the ones that we talked about in the last slide.
Awesome, thank you. And I think we have one more category left to talk about, Gabriel.
Right,
And
that's the fans. That's the
fans.
most excited. The most exciting part of this is bringing in the spectators for the event. There's going to be so many from around the world for all of these tournaments. I think especially for the World Cup and for the Olympics, we're seeing, I mean, I think hundreds of thousands, if not in the millions of visitors coming to the United States for these events. This is why we do it. This is the reason why we have these sports events. And so Tiffany, tell us a little bit about what fans can expect, what types of visas they'll need to apply for, if they need to apply for a visa, or what that process might look for them.
Yeah, so like you said, these events would not be the same without the fans. We have to have the fans here, and they're coming from all around the world. So there are two primary options. We've touched on these a bit already, so I won't dive in too deeply. But the first is through the Visa Waiver Program, or ESTA. Fans from one of 42 eligible visa waiver countries might be able to travel without a visa to attend these great events. The process is much faster and it's cheaper than the visa application process. So this is a good place to start if you are from one of those 42 countries. But there are certain key criteria that have to be met. The good news, though, is that if for some reason an individual does not qualify for ESTA or applies for ESTA and is denied, you still can apply for a visa. And that gets into our second option here, which is the B1, B2 visa, which is a temporary business or tourism visa, which is exactly what these fans are. They are touring the US. We are showing off all of our host cities and the great United States. And so here, the B process is going to be a bit lengthier. And there's a couple of hurdles that some applicants might run into, primarily due to visa processing time. So the key here is really applying for a visa as early as possible for any fans that are seeking to come to the United States, especially in certain countries like Colombia, where the wait times are lengthy. But these are your two primary options. And the process is, this is the most common visa that the US government adjudicates. And so they're very familiar with this visa. But the key here, again, is to go ahead and apply early so that you can get here on time.
That's a really good point. And talking about applying early and knowing that we're cognizant on time, we want to save some time for Q&A. I do want to talk a little bit about what the processing for these visa types are going to be and what individuals can expect. So Tiffany, can you tell us a little bit about the application process for applying a visa? Should they expect delays? What are we seeing and what are we hearing from our perspective?
Yeah, there's a few key considerations just when you're looking at the visa process in general. One is processing, and this is both the time it takes to prepare some of these visas, and some of them are part of a multi-step process. We've kind of alluded to that, for example, the O1 is going to take some time to prepare, to file that petition with US Citizenship and Immigration Services, all before even applying for the visa itself at a US embassy or consulate overseas. Whereas something like an I visa, the applicant can go directly to the visa stage and apply for the visa while skipping USCIS. So that is a careful and important consideration on the processing, is just having a good understanding of what all might be required, because there might be some steps even before you get to the visa process itself. And then within the visa process, there is an application and an interview requirement, which also kind of gets me into a second consideration that's related to this, which is on timing. And here again, it's the time to take to prepare that application, but also other timing considerations. I mentioned visa wait times around the world can be long. And so applicants might face delays in getting into a US embassy or consulate for their interview, but also other things such as how long it might take for actual visa processing itself. For example, if somebody runs into unexpected administrative processing. And one thing I'll note here is that with events like the World Cup or the Olympics. You have people coming from all over the United States, or from all over the world, I should say, including from countries whose travel may be restricted. And while the current travel bans that the US has in place do have exceptions for certain individuals who are traveling to the World Cup or traveling to the Olympics, the government hasn't really clarified who might be covered by that exception outside of a key few people. And so some individuals who might be tied to these events, especially, your accredited individuals, your teams, your media, things like that, they might need what is called a national interest exception. And what this means is that their case has to go through this internal government process. And that's where timing is a key component here, because even if you do everything on the visa application and you get in for an interview quickly, it might still take a few months for the government to process that national interest exception if you are from a country where there is a travel ban in place.
So Tiffany, if I'm hearing it consistently across what you're saying, is the process is lengthy, complex, highly nuanced. How early, if you are representing or you have employees that are going to need a work visa, how early should you be discussing with an attorney for this process?
I mean, I would say it's always better to start early than later. As somebody who is constantly keeping up with different government policy changes and things like that, the more time that you can have to work through some of these different challenges, the better for anybody who is trying to prepare for the 2026 FIFA World Cup next summer. The time is now. Starting that process early, talking to an immigration attorney to make sure that you're getting the right visas and getting those interviews scheduled so that you can get your staff here and your workforce here when they're needed to be here. And there's not sort of that rush right before the event. Now, if we're looking ahead to LA 28, obviously there's a little bit more time here, and some of those individuals might have more of a window to work with before they need to really think about who their workforce is coming in during that 28 summer time period. But I'm always going to be a fan for the sooner the better.
Exactly. I tend to agree with you. You said earlier, and I was like, a reminder that some people are new to the U.S. immigration system. Is that weeks? Is that months? What is earlier? And yet, like you mentioned, months I think is the correct answer. If you're looking at the World Cup, now's the time. If you're looking at 2028 Olympics, 2027 is the time. So I do think it's never really too early to start asking these questions, and I think people really need to get on it if they're planning to bring people to the U.S. So with all that being said, and Kristi, I'm gonna ask you to go over this a little quickly so we can go to that Q&A. But let's assume that those individuals got the right visas, they have everything they need. What do they need to know before they enter the United States?
Yeah, you think you're already done with getting USCIS approval and then the visa. Think of the visa as a boarding pass. You'll still need to be allowed entry into the US, and that decision is with Customs and Border Protection, CBP. So here are the things that you need to consider to facilitate that seamless entry, right? So first off, making sure that you have a valid passport. That the passport itself is valid for at least 6 months after your planned travel. Now, if you have one that's expiring, which I get if you're going to the US to work for years, that could still be fine, but it will impact the duration of your allowed stay and also complicate the process. So make sure that you have a passport that is valid for at least 6 months after you plan travel. Make sure that the rest of your documents are ready, your visa stamp, your status documents, and that's going to depend on the visa type itself. And then also prepare for potential questions about your purpose in the US. If you're a fan, that's simple, but make sure you avoid any suggestions that you're going to be working in the US, which you cannot on a B1 or an ESTA. Or B2 ESTA. If you're on a work visa, you may be asked questions about your employment. What do you do? Who is your employer? How are you getting paid? Those kind of questions. And in general, you may get questions about how long you're staying, who you're staying with. And a recent trend we're seeing is that CBP is performing electronic device checks for terrorists or anti-American support or ties. So you may get asked questions about that as well. The lack of the required documents, inability to answer questions, it could potentially result in additional inspection or delay entry. I'm sure we all want to avoid that.
Thank you, Kristi. And while we go into the key takeaways, I do want to encourage everyone to submit their questions. We are going to open up for questions for the last 15 minutes or so. But we do want to just highlight what we've discussed, what you can take away from this. And I think the biggest thing is start the visa application process as early as possible. Whether you think you need a work visa or not, if you don't know if your workers are going to need work visas, probably time to start asking that question and starting to talk to professionals that can work with you on that. Tiffany, any takeaways from you?
Yeah, I would say another key takeaway is for accredited participants. And these are those groups that will be accredited or sort of registered as a way of thinking about it with the event organizer for the event, such as your teams, broadcast and media, commercial sponsors. It's important that you communicate with the event organizer, as they are working closely with the host country governments and often have event specific information and resources to share with you.
Yeah, and lastly, I just encourage working with experienced professionals who understand the complexities of this field. It's very, very important to get someone and have that first call as early out as you can, so you have a plan in place. And working with someone who knows the ins and outs will help you find those different types of visas, creative solutions for your needs for these tournaments. And with that, I think we can take it to Q&A. We have some submitted. I'm looking over on my screen. I'm having them collected right here. The first one I saw was one person while we were going over the P1A and the B1. We talked about athletes qualifying for the business visitor exception as they're coming in, as long as they are working for an international team coming to the U.S. and they're not being paid by a U.S. source. Does that apply to the coaches and the support staff as well?
Generally, I would say yes, and this is an area that there is not great guidance on, and that I think is probably the most challenging component of B visas or ESTA in general, is that there are a number of examples that the government provides, but sometimes it doesn't actually give you full clarity, especially when you're looking at events like this. But the intent of something like that with the athletes is that, you know, what they're doing in the US is really incidental to their work abroad. Their job is abroad, they're on the team abroad. And that same is true for coaches and any of the support staff for the team. So I'd say generally speaking, yes. I will note though that where teams have their own media and broadcast production, that can get a little bit tricky. For example, I know that there were some Club World Cup teams that have their own media, and it really varies team by team for how that is handled. So there may be some exceptions to that case. But I think, you know, again, generally speaking, yes, the coaches and the support staff can travel on the Bs or the ESTA as well as the athletes.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And the questions are coming in. I'm going to try to get to as many as we can, but keep sending them in as we're speaking. But one other question we had was, how might it work if an athlete is already on a visa? The example given is someone on a student visa to play NCAA college soccer or college sports of some sort, and participating either in the Women's World Cup, the Olympics, or anything like that. How might that student visa affect their ability to participate in those tournaments?
So the lawyer answer is it depends, right? It does depend on what the visa is. If it's a student visa, you know, and then they're depending on whether or not that's already part of their engagement, their program, they may be able to play, but also whether or not they're getting paid. The students cannot get paid on a student visa and have active income. You can only have one visa, be on one visa at a time. So depending on the visa type and what the activity is, you may have to look into switching the visa or maybe amending the current visa to allow for additional activities working for additional organizations.
And one thing I'll add to that is one sort of, I guess, great thing about activities that are okay on a B visa and ESTA is that they are not considered work. So if something is not considered work for B visa purposes, it's also not going to be considered work for a student visa or any other visa that has a limitation. So that is just something to kind of keep in mind. But again, as Kristi said, it does kind of depend on what visa that individual might have and what exactly they will be doing in the United States for that period. That's different than why they have received the original visa.
So under that same analysis, it doesn't necessarily need to be a student visa. Let's say it was an H-1B. I believe a few years back there was actually someone playing for the U.S. Cricket team that was like a software engineer in the U.S. Could someone who was a part-time H-1B worker then go and participate in the Olympics as long as they fall under that B-1 exception for professional athletes?
I would say yes, as long as they fall under that guidance where it is pretty specific. You can't be you're only competing for prize money, so you can't be getting paid. You can't be engaging in any other sort of like outside promotional activities that you're being financially or otherwise compensated for, to the point where it's not work. Then yes, that's going to be true.
Great point. So one other question we had come in, it says we've had staff go through the visa process recently and have been denied. Are there any tips you can share for how they might be able to get a visa so they can travel next year?
So this is a great question, and this ties to government policy changes and being on track with those changes. We didn't really dive into that today, but there are a lot of changes in the immigration space the last several months, and some individuals have experienced some challenges due to enhanced scrutiny of visa applicants. So one thing that I am always encouraging, having been on the other side of that visa process myself and adjudicating visas, is that being prepared for the visa interview, including being able to articulate that the purpose of travel and eligibility for that visa, like really understanding why this is the visa that the person is applying for, can really make a huge difference in whether that visa is ultimately approved or denied by the consular officer. So that is sort of probably my top takeaway usually for anybody who has gone through the visa process before, is that the interview is very important. And oftentimes I find people are kind of waiting for the consular officer to ask them a bunch of very specific targeted questions, and that's not always the case. And so making sure that that person knows how to explain their role and why they qualify for the visa really is important.
What can employers do to make sure that their employees are prepared for those interview questions?
They can hire BAL. No, joking aside, I would say talk to an immigration attorney, talk to somebody that is familiar with immigration in general, but also in this sports context and with those government policy changes and how it impacts the process and what that process looks like. With so much, kind of constantly going on, it's really important to stay on top of those updates and understand how they will impact your particular workforce and your group of people that you're trying to bring over.
I think this also goes back to our suggestion earlier to start as soon as possible in the process, right? Because like if there is a denial, if you start early enough, maybe able to come up with a backup plan to try again to get the employee in the US for this event, not have to worry about like, oh, the next event, try to get them then. There may be backup options.
Yep, key takeaway, start early, but let's keep saying it going on the call. We have another question. Kristi, you might be able to help with this one. It says, we do not have an exact list of staff who need visas yet, but we do want to start the process as early as we can. They heard us. What are the things we can do now to prepare while we develop that list?
I love that. I love that you're trying to start early. That is the best part here. There are a lot of ways in which you can plan for this, right? Like, if you know how many people could be applying, the employees that you need to have in the US, the general roles that you're going to need to have in the US. This allows counsel to assess, okay, how much work is going to be needed here. What are the different type of visas going to be involved? What are the maybe communications with the government that we can have to facilitate that visa process? The more information you can communicate and provide to your legal counsel, the better they can do to prepare and plan for the event that comes up.
Really good point. That's really good. But again, early key takeaway. Tiffany, what if someone doesn't qualify for any work visa category, but they are a key part of an employer's workforce? I think this is going to be our last question.
Yeah, and Gabriel, I actually think that this really gets to sort of what you were talking about earlier, is that looking at visas in a way that might not be the normal way the government is used to seeing them, making sure that, you know, we as immigration professionals understand what those organizations need and why they need them, to help educate the government. And I think here, you know, finding ways to potentially utilize categories such as the P1S visa might be an option. I think that depending on the situation, there, you know, it might be that there are limited options, but it doesn't mean that that person, for example, with the World Cup coming up, there are 3 countries involved. So somebody might not be able to come to the United States, but it doesn't mean that they can't go to Mexico or Canada, for example, where you still have that key member of your workforce in place and near the some of the events. But there, I think that these are just all tying back to sort of start that process early, start getting a sense of sort of what you're looking at so that you can plan for these sort of outcomes.
Okay. Anything else? Any parting wisdom before we call it a day?
Did we mention starting early?
I think we did. I think we did. And with that, we thank you all for joining us today. This has, I hope, been as entertaining as I promised when we started, or at the very least, it was a very interesting subject to go over with you. But feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any additional questions, want any other answers that we did not go over here, or you just want to talk and hang out. We're here for you as well. Here, our emails are right here. I believe it will be shared as well after the panel's over. But again, thank you so much for attending, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Gabriel. And as a reminder, we would appreciate your feedback via the survey section at the right side of your screen. Your feedback helps us shape our future webinars so they are most relevant to you. And finally, thanks again for attending. Be sure to watch your email for a link to the on-demand recording and PDF presentation and these handy dandy emails, which I know you want to reach out to us with. Thanks again and have a great day.